Hi, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Vicki Goodman, and on behalf of UCLA's Friends of the Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior, the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Board of Advisors, and WOW, the Wonder of Women, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our Open Mind program with Lisa Selin Davis, author of the groundbreaking, insightful, and daring new book, Tomboy, The Surprising History and Future of Girls Who Dare to Be Different. Tomboy, which originally began as several op-eds that Lisa wrote for the New York Times that went viral, was named a New York Times Editor's Choice pick and was on the Publishers Weekly's Best Nonfiction Books of 2020 list. Lisa is also the author of numerous articles and essays for the New York Times, CNN, Yahoo, Salon, and many other publications, as well as the author of 2 novels, Belly and Lost Stars. We are honored to welcome Lisa, who is joining us from her home in Brooklyn, where she lives with her family, her husband, and 2 children. We are also honored to welcome Dr. Yalda T. Uhls, founder and director of the Center for Scholars and Storytellers, an organization dedicated to bridging the work of child development researchers and youth content creators that is based at UCLA. Yalda is a former senior executive at MGM and Sony who left the movie world to study child development, earning a Ph.D. in psychology at UCLA. She is also an assistant adjunct professor at UCLA, where she does research on how media affects the social behavior of tweens and teens, and teaches a class on digital media and human development. She is an advisor for YouTube Kids and Family, the Bill and Melinda Gates Equitable Future Project, Common Sense Media, and the Jacobs Foundation's Learning and Science Exchange, and the author of the parenting book, Media Moms and Digital Dads, a fact, not fear approach to parenting in the digital age. Research conducted by Dr. Uhls has been featured in Time Magazine, the New York Times, USA Today, NPR, and many others, and published in academic journals such as Developmental Psychology and Computers in Human Behavior. We would like to thank both of these outstanding, accomplished scholars for taking the time from their busy schedules to join us today and share their knowledge and expertise with us. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Today's program will run for 1 hour and is being taped. So if your friends, colleagues, or family were not able to join us today, they will have the opportunity to watch the video, which is located on the Friends of Semel YouTube channel, which is located on the Friends of Semel website, Friends of Semel of the SemelInstitute.org. There you will also find a library of past Open Mind program videos, as well as a calendar of upcoming events, which we hope you will all join us for. We have reserved time for your questions in the last segment of the program. If you would like to ask a question of either of our scholars, please type it into the Q&A, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will do our best to get to just as many questions as possible. And lastly, we have an exciting announcement about the inaugural Friends of Semel Open Mind Film Festival for high school students. Due to popular demand, we have extended the deadline for submissions to March 11th, and we are excited to announce that the festival is now open to all high school students in the country. All details can be found on the Film Freeway website, and the link to the Film Free website is on the Friends of Semel website. Now, please join me in giving a warm Zoom welcome to Lisa Selin Davis and Dr. Yalda Uhls. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Vicki. And thank you to UCLA and Open Mind for having us. And Lisa, it's really great to be on this Zoom stage with you and learn from you about all the amazing research and work you did to study the history of gender and the words that all of us are confused by. But let's start with a sort of a more simple question. I'd love to know from you. You wrote these op-eds, they went viral, they had many, many, many comments. What sort of led you to do that and then inspired you to actually write the book, which I know is a huge accomplishment?
Well, thank you. And thanks again to Vicki and all the folks at Semmel. And I'm so happy to be part of this and to be at a series called Open Mind, because I think that is so important when we're talking about gender. And very excited to talk to you, Yalda, because your work at the center is so valuable and interesting. So the project began because when my daughter was 3, my older daughter, the kids started to divide in preschool. The boys started to play more with boys and girls with girls. I didn't understand any of that then. And honestly, neither did anybody else, the teachers, the pediatricians. No one had really studied child development enough to know why kids do that around me. But my kid didn't divide like all the other kids. She really stayed in the middle. She played with boys and girls. When she started wanting to dress herself, the clothes she wanted were initially, a blazer and a button-down shirt, which was actually a great phase that then turned into stained t-shirts and sweatpants, unfortunately, which is still her outfit. And so at first I started writing about that because I was exploring like what does it mean when you have a child, a daughter who's not doing what the other girls do, and when you're a feminist and you sort of want that and at the same time you worry about that. I explored that in a piece for Parenting magazine, which actually was never edited, and the magazine closed and they just threw it up on the web, and the title was My Daughter Wants to Be a Boy, which is really not what I was talking about. But also no one was talking about trans kids at the time, and it just went unnoticed. Years go by, my child goes to elementary school, and it's a little rough. People have a really hard time understanding that this short-haired, sweatpants person is a girl, the kids. But they have a number of talks with the class about it, and eventually the kids leave her alone. But the adults were having a harder time. And one day she came home and said, "Did you know that I'm a tomboy?" And I said, "Oh, where did you hear that?" She said, "Oh, someone in class told me. I still don't know who." And she explained that that was a girl with short hair who liked sports. And that was the second awakening of like, oh, that word was so common when I was a child. And also this kind of short-haired, spunky, sporty girl was everywhere in the media.
Yeah, I'm
And
thinking Harriet the Spy.
yes, it's a great example. But they were the most popular girls in the TV shows of my youth and the movies, and I saw lots of them, even though I wasn't one. So that was the first moment of, what happened to that word? And then the next thing that happened was these very, very kind adults who had known my child for years and who were going to, workshops on gender. We're asking her constantly, did she want to change her pronoun? Did she want to change in the boys' locker room? And there's nothing wrong with that, I guess, if you're asking everyone, but it became this kind of interesting skepticism and also a message that if you like quote unquote boy things, you must be a boy, which was weirdly, on the one hand, so progressive, and on the other hand, so regressive.
Mhm.
As if the whole 1970s didn't happen, where we worked so hard to say that girls can have boy things. And it turns out the 1870s also. So it was really, I wrote about that in the Times, and I wrote that maybe my kid is transgender, but this message that liking boy stuff makes you a boy is problematic to me, and that there was a huge reaction to that. And it was also, all of those things happened, and eventually, actually, it was my agent who said, this you have to write a book about this. And I was like, oh, I'm terrified to write a book about this. But
I'm curious, was that reaction, do you think, primarily from conservative people or from liberal
Oh.
people? It was from liberals, right?
Well, it was.
I mean, you
from
may not know, but
no, I mean, some of it was from trans people who felt like it was insulting. It was like a way of saying, some of my best friends are trans, but my kid isn't. And some people felt insulted that I would insist that my child is a girl, that was repressive to her in some way. There were all kinds of reactions that were totally new to me. And I had no idea that there was a kind of culture war between some feminists and some trans people. Of course, neither of these groups are monoliths, and people have their own opinions within them. And that there was a battle over whether gender, it is socially constructed or whether it's innate, and that it's so interesting how each group at times aligns itself with some segment of right-wing thinking. I mean, and I just did not understand that there was this battle, and I had just walked right into it thinking, I'm going to make an interesting point, and I did it was an interesting point, and I stand by my point, but man, I know a lot more about my point now.
yeah, and what as you know, at the center, we have focused a little bit on evolving gender roles for boys and male stereotypes, and people, and people haven't even thought about that in a lot of ways. So, and part of the reason we did it is, there's so much work about evolving gender stereotypes for girls. But, as Gloria Steinem said, we want our daughters to become more like men, but it'll never work until our sons become more like women. Have you heard that
Yes.
phrase? And how does that intersect at all with the work that you've done?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the interesting things about well, I want to pull back for a minute and just talk about the word gender for a second.
I'd love that.
I didn't understand this really until after I was done with the book. So I think this will go in the paperback edition. And in fact, I've written a number of pieces about this that no one has taken. And I really think the center and left press is pretty terrified of this subject. But what I've come to understand is that gender means different things to different people. So if you were, part of the women's movement, if you're a feminist, the word gender probably means gender roles and stereotypes to you, gender norms. It refers to all the expectations that are associated with your biological sex. But then there's a whole new generation for whom gender really means gender identity. And it really is, the idea is not that it's this set of socially constructed norms to oppress someone, but rather that it's how innately masculine or feminine you are and how you see yourself. And I think that's the root of this culture war. But I also think it's a false dichotomy to decide that anything is simply cultural or simply biological, that those things are always in relationship. And
so is gender, go ahead, sorry, is gender considered biological? Or is it socially constructed?
It depends on what your definition of gender is. And many people will say how masculine or feminine I am or how I present is biological. But that's very threatening to other groups of people who are saying, you've told me for years that, my sex is going to determine my role in society and I don't want it to. So there's overlap, and then there's dissonance. And there's so much confusion, and there's so much confusion over language. But I think one of the things I learned the most was that, the last time there was a real tomboy heyday was the 1970s when I was a kid, and when all those tomboys were so popular. And it was the women's movement, and there was a concerted effort to open up boys' worlds to girls, to say, you can play sports and you can have short hair. And there were boys to girls size conversion charts in the Sears catalog, like clear messages that said, nothing is off limits to you. But we've never sent that message to boys ever.
Never.
And the problem is, and what became very clear to me, because as I researched this book, because if a tomboy is a girl who likes boy stuff, then we have to ask, I'm less interested in the question of what is a girl than what is boy stuff and what is girl stuff. Where do those ideas come from? And they shift. Our idea of what's normal for boys and girls shifts, and they shift to serve a purpose. So it's always been very important, I think, for parents of boys to make sure they don't cross over into the girl land. We don't dress them in pink. Why don't we dress them in pink? What are we afraid of? Why don't we put dresses on boys? Why do we cordon them off from so much of what's marked as for girls, especially because what's marked as for girls, a lot of it is really good, important stuff, right? Dolls.
Absolutely.
Dolls are good. Like, they help you build
Definitely.
communication skills.
Social play is, that's how young children, there actually was a study about, you may have seen it, it came out after your book, I believe, with girls and boys playing with dolls to see if a doll, because play is really how children, interact and learn about their roles. And so they wanted to see if playing with a doll could be the same as playing with a friend. And they found that it does serve the same purpose, that social interaction. And there was no difference for boys and girls. It served the exact same developmental purpose that every child needs to go through. Yet we're depriving boys of that.
And in fact, there's research from the late 19th century that up to 82% of boys played with dolls. And at some point in the 1960s, toy manufacturers realized that so many boys were sneaking off to play with dolls and Barbies that they created action figures, which are dolls but they're called action figures. So it's sanctioned. So it's not to deny that there are biological differences between men and women, boys and girls, but rather to say that what we think of as boy typical and girl typical, a lot of that is created by us, perpetuated by us. And the problem with it is that it cuts children off from so much human stuff because we've said it's boy stuff.
Embracing their whole identity. Well, and you even said, the pink, the wearing the dresses. You want to talk a little bit about the history, because we know that boys used to wear pink and wear dresses, now that's sanctioned. But
I mean, what's fascinating about that is that now today, both boys and girls can wear pants and no one thinks anything of it, right? But it used to be that both boys and girls could wear dresses and no one would think anything of it. So up until about 100 years ago, young boys and girls were dressed the same. And they were dressed according to age, not sex. And sex was de-emphasized. It was not something that parents wanted to think a lot about. And the reason is because gender, sex, and sexuality were all kind of enmeshed in people's minds. So to think about a little kid as a man or a woman, a little man or a little woman, would call up images of them as a sexual being. And you didn't want to do that. So they were kids, but their sex didn't matter that much. You only needed to emphasize that to prepare them for playing their proper role as macho man and submissive woman, right? So that happened later in childhood. But at the turn of the 20th century, as psychologists started studying homosexuality more, they started separating sexuality from sex. So it was no longer just assumed that you'd be straight just because, that just because you're a man, you'll be attracted to women. There was some debate about whether or not this was okay. There were definitely early sexologists arguing, oh, this is a normal human variation. But they lost, unfortunately. And so psychologists and parenting experts in these fields were really growing, advised parents to emphasize the sex of their children and to emphasize gender, that is to emphasize the roles they should play, to make sure that boys grew up to be straight and to make sure that girls grew up to be submissive.
You're saying it's the developmental psychologist's fault? Thanks a lot.
Sorry. Now I think developmental psychologists are the most important people to to help people understand what's going on. But yes, it was the publishing industry also and other things going on. But yes, it was it was an early understanding of homosexuality as caused by nurture, not nature. And that, you know, that it was something to be avoided. So what happened was, instead of dressing them all in little dresses and letting them all grow their hair long, then it was, oh, let's start preparing them early. So let's start dressing little boys as little men. No more. They were wearing either dresses or they wore those lacy little Lord Fauntleroy suits.
Lord Fauntleroy.
And but that all went out, and it was like, you know, and you're only going to have clothes if they're going to have animals. They're going to have bears and lions and manly animals and balls. And your clothes are going to be part of how we prepare you to be masculine and straight. And then toys followed. So there started to be an erector set for boys that will help you become the engineer, you know, you are destined to be. And here's a mop and broom set for girls. And there are the history of gendering clothes has been really carefully studied by a historian named Joe Paoletti, and the history of gendering toys has been carefully studied by a sociologist named Elizabeth Sweet. I think
I love her work.
I think the work that they've done is vitally important to understanding what we think of today as boy stuff and girl stuff. And people believe it is biological, but we can look back and see, no, this was done to make sure that, again, that the boys were straight and macho, and that the girls were submissive. And we've fought back against that at various times. However, it's pretty woven into our experiences today. All the work you've done at the Center on representation, of kids in the media, the messages that kids get, and I think it's really, the work you've done is really important. It's really important for people to understand that children by age 3 are fully versed in gender stereotypes. They don't necessarily understand gender constancy, which is the idea that, you know, your membership in a girl or boy category, at least for cisgender children, is going to remain whether or not you perfect those stereotypes. But the reason girls go through this massive princess phase from about ages 3 to 6 is because they think that's how you are a girl. So 74% of girls are trying to be this archetypical or stereotypical girl by you know, doing the full pink frilly dress thing that developmental psychologists have also studied.
Yeah, I have a daughter who's now 21, and you know, I think of myself as a feminist, or as, you know, as you know, a role model, a strong female role model, and definitely she went through the princess phase, and I was horrified. And then my son, you know, did the trucks, and you think that what's happening in the home, you know, is really going to socialize their gender roles and how they act out gender. But they, as you said, they start picking it up from the environment around them. And I'm sure we also, you know, we've internalized a lot of that, so we share it with them. And I remember when we did the you know, just recently I was at CVS looking for a card, and it was, so the cards, you know, birthday cards are gendered, pink and blue. Like, it's so embedded in so many symbols in our culture that it seems almost impossible to eliminate.
I mean, as you talked about before, and as I've written about, the only way to eliminate that, to kind of make our children's worlds gender neutral, is to make all the girl stuff available to boys. So it is to dress boys in pink. It is to buy them a Barbie dream house. It's to, I mean, it's partly to not make decisions based on sex or gender, but it's also changing the culture and normalizing that, and putting boys on the boxes of the, you know, the jewelry kits in the toy store. There are no boys on there.
It's so true. And you know, what's really interesting is we did a study, we haven't released this data, and we asked girls and boys, 157 young people from across the country, and we took some masculine role pressure questions. I feel the pressure to be strong. I feel the pressure to talk about sex. I feel the pressure to hide my emotions. And, you know, the survey wasn't actually about that. But that was one question. We found no gender differences in any of those questions. Both girls and boys felt all those masculine pressures. And I think that is partially because we have socialized girls to, and there's still, I'm not saying we solved all the issues for women for sure, but many young girls, these were 13 to 17-year-old girls, were feeling the exact same masculine role pressures as boys were. And I bet if we did it the opposite way, it still would be gendered if we had female role pressures.
Yeah, and that's interesting because, of course, a tomboy is in theory a masculine girl who has been by and large accepted. I mean, it depends on how masculine, but if she's prepubescent, it's thought of as cute. It's not threatening. It's sweet. Again, there's Scout in To Kill a Mockingbird. I mean, there's Joe from Little Women, right? These are the most popular characters in the history of American literature and film. And but never have there been feminine boys who are popular like that. And I think there's been this acceptance of masculinity in girls. There's never been the opposite. And of course, we have to stop thinking of these things as masculine and feminine, because that's
right.
part of what makes people feel they have to push these parts of themselves away. And what's interesting about the research done by a psychologist named Mei-Ling Halim and some of her colleagues about this pink frilly dress phase, when they studied why are all these girls going through this phase? Well, it's really that they're just trying to perfect being a girl. But then they discovered that they went through this, what they called the Ph.D. to tomboy phase, which was around age 6. These girls would start saying, I hate pink. I'm not into princesses. I don't want to wear this dress. They start wanting to wear pants. And a lot of parents are relieved and they think, oh, the princess phase is over. But they looked at boys. Well, boys weren't doing that. Boys weren't turning 6 and saying, oh, now I get it. Putting on a dress doesn't make me a girl. Playing football doesn't make me a boy. Now I can do whatever, right? Boys, in fact, got more rigid in their need to perform this kind of boy gender role. And so what they realized was that kids were not only just understanding gender hierarchy, gender constancy, that is that, it doesn't matter what they do or what they wear, right, but they were understanding the hierarchy, and they were understanding
for sure
that the world looks down on femininity, whatever we say femininity is, because it's so random, right? Pink is so random that is considered feminine, but the girls had learned to say, I hate pink, and the boys had learned to say, I'm not going to wear that, that's pink. And all that is girls are yucky and bad.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much research though, because they're attuned to status. I mean, preschoolers are attuned to status at a very young age, and it's white and males have status, and they start performing towards status and imitating people of status, and so it's not surprising on some level. Even there's obviously colors and toys and all sorts of different things that are associated with the sex, but it's also about like, oh, that's the person I want to be like, because that person has power.
Yeah. Well, they're very smart.
They start at such young ages. So you said that we should mourn, not celebrate the end of the princess phase. Is that because it's girls moving on, and sort of saying, okay, I want to go into the next phase, but boys don't do the same thing?
I mean, I think it's less about mourning it than it is that understanding that when a girl says, I hate pink, that they're saying, I hate this part of myself, that I understand that I am female and I am at a disadvantage. And, I have one extremely feminine daughter, and she started to go through that phase. And in fact, her friends came over. I write about this in the book for her 7th birthday party. And they were like, we are not watching a film about a princess. And I had just read this research and I was horrified. And my feeling was in our home, nothing was going to be marked as less than because it was culturally marked as feminine. So everyone is required to wear some pink in this house. It's like that cult in Oregon. My husband wears pink. I mean, not all the time. I wear lots of pink. My older daughter, who has always been masculine, whatever that means, has pink hair. We're just not going to say that something is bad because it's associated with girls. And I have to push back against the culture all the time, everywhere around us, in a way that is annoying for my children. But I needed to give my younger daughter permission to continue on that path, even though people were telling her all the time that there was something wrong with it. And I began to be—
How old is she now?
She's almost 9.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's just so interesting because then, then they enter the preteen years and then the adolescent years. And then again, but then the culture is saying, okay, you can have value and status if you make yourself ultra feminine, because then you're attractive to the opposite sex. And, that's the way you have, status in this culture. So then they swing back, some of them, many of them. So they're constantly being, shifting how they embrace who they actually are.
Yeah. I was just talking to a friend about a lot of the tweens and teens around us. Girls are going through a grunge phase. I guess that's what's popular right now. So they're walking around, even if they have makeup on, behind their mask, they're walking around in these loose jeans and these big oversized plaid shirts. And I think it's great. It's unisex. I mean, of course, if we really want things to be unisex, then a leotard and sparkly tights should be unisex. I mean, none of this stuff clothes should not be for one kind of person or another. But I appreciate that the popular aesthetic around here is totally unsexual. And I think that's great. I mean, none of these kids are seeing each other in person anyway, because a pandemic.
Yeah, I don't know. It did not happen. It was a while ago, 7 years ago for my daughter, but she was invited to quite a few bat mitzvahs and bar mitzvahs, and the way that the girls dressed were quite, at 12, 13, was incredibly feminine. And she got very angry at me because I definitely judged the way that she dressed and her friends dressed. So it's, it may be different in Los Angeles.
It's hard not to. And I was on the radio in New Zealand last week, and they had actually had me on 3 years ago when my op-ed had come out. And they said to me, oh, we asked you 3 years ago what your fears are for your daughter. And I said, I don't remember what I said, but my fears are for my younger child, my gender conforming child. I worry about her because I don't want her to think that all of her value is located in her looks, which is what girls learn. And so
mine too. And it also means that they respond to social norms and culture, and then also peer pressure. If a child feels confident enough to sort of buck against those kinds of things, hopefully they'll carry that over into other realms. So I can completely understand that feeling. But fact, my daughter has gone through it, and she's certainly
she's doing all right.
She's fine. Yeah, she's certainly, she kept the other part of her, and as she's gotten older and older, she's got, she understands more and more her strength. And, it takes a while, but, so before we open it up to questions, I just wanted to ask you sort of just basically, what's the word gender mean? And what about all these gender identity labels? You know, what's your thinking around that? You know, for our surveys that we do for when we do them with participants, you know, do we put male, female, and then add a whole bunch of different identities? Do you put male, female, other? What do you think?
Well, as we were talking about before, I think there's tons of confusion around these words, and not just the definitions of gender that I was using, where for some people it's these social norms and expectations that are constructed, and for some people it's about identity that's innate. And for some people it's a synonym for sex. So, you know, I keep going on these sites and they say select a gender and it says male or female. And I think, well, that's not a gender. Do you need to know my sex for medical reasons? Do you need to know if I'm genetically male or female? Lots of people do need to know that. There are reasons for that. For marketing purposes, do you need to know how I identify? And how will you change my experience based on how I answer? So one of the things I write about in the book is buying these Kindle Fires, and it forces me to select a gender. And I think that gender the thing about using the word gender that way as a gender is that it can apply to cis and trans kids both. And if you're doing it on a tablet, it's not like some medical setting where you need to know about a child's body. So if you identified as a girl and you selected girl, that would work. The problem is everything is filtered according to how you select. So if you buy a Kindle Fire and you select girl, the whole thing turns pink and it's like Barbie apps. And, you know, and there's no way to get a mix. And I ended up getting rid of them because I just could not handle that. And when I signed my kids up, I signed them up for Spotify. I think it also said gender and it was male or female, which is not accurate. And then non-binary. And I said to my kids, like, I don't know what they do with this information, but they'll probably make suggestions to you based on how you answer. So how do you want to answer? And this is to me, it's a big problem. And it's something that I'd like our society to try to hammer out. What do these words mean? But different groups want these words to mean different things, right? So,
right. So what do you use instead of male and female, assuming you're not asking for medical reasons? And I totally understand we shouldn't ask about gender in order to filter commercial products towards, or even non-commercial products towards us. But if there are medical issues, if you're just doing something in terms of information that needs to be collected for non-commercial reasons, what do you suggest?
Well, I mean, it depends what you're asking. You know, are you asking how people identify? You know, you can just put boy or girl, and then people will, or non-binary, or 72 gender identity options like Facebook. You know, and I have been asking, you know, is that liberating, right? Is it
the 72? Yeah.
Is it liberating, especially when it comes to children? Because I get a lot of notes from parents saying my kid is desperately confused about their gender identity. And they also, lately, gender non-conforming has become a gender identity. So I no longer use that term because I was using that to describe kids who don't conform to gender roles. So now I've started to use gender atypical. And by that, and so it's
mind-boggling.
It's hard to know, you know, do you want to know how everyone who identifies as a girl views a certain subject when you're doing research, or do you want to know there's the sex that they were born or assigned at birth, if you use that terminology? And there's really no consensus, but I can say that there are many people who think now that male or female is a gender identity. And, you know, we are mammals, so we mostly come in these two kinds, and there's a small amount of intersexuality, but some of it doesn't change whether or not you are genetically male or female. It just you might have like one internal testy, and, you know, so I think there's tremendous confusion, and there are a lot of people, especially a lot of people in the law, a lot of people trying to argue for, this is my view of gender, and I'm going to try to arrange all of these words to promote my view of gender, what I think it is, if I think it's biological, if I think it's constructed. And it's incredibly confusing, and it makes it really hard for us to share a common goal, which I think is to say, your body does not define you. You know, when we have a gender reveal party, which is of course not revealing, it's a sex reveal party, but when you have that, all you're revealing is that you have a bunch of expectations based on the body of your child. And what I'm saying to people is, when you slap a label on a kid for not doing what you thought they were going to do because of their body, is it liberating? That's what the word tomboy was. It worked for a long time. It allowed these girls to be left alone. If we have 72 versions of tomboy now, will that do the trick? The main thing, the main project, is to stop assuming that the kind of body your child has will determine what colors they like, who they want to play with, what games they want to play, what personality traits they have. What I want is to really separate the body and the expectations, and I want to create room that way. I think it's important to get a handle on the language, but I think it's a big mess right now, honestly. I really do. And when I'm filling out forms and they say gender, male or female, I write in sex. Like, what are you asking? You know, which thing are you asking me? I try to pin people down. What is it that you want to know right now?
That's thank you so much. That was fun. And Vicki, hello.
Hi, and first of all, thank you both. What an interesting and informative conversation. I think we all of us who have the privilege of being on this Zoom have learned a lot today. So I want to, first of all, thank you both. We have many questions. One from Yalda, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. How do you bring this conversation to the mainstream, even more to schools? I know when we were promoting this event, we sent to the local schools, and as many schools as we know that are out of the Los Angeles area. And it's hard to tell what the response has been, but I think it's such an important subject, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. How we can get it in the schools.
I think it really needs to be in schools. I mean, you can call me, I'll come and talk to your school. I organized a gender night at my school, and I got some people to come in, and I said, I really want you to talk about gender stereotypes, because there are all of these boys who like princesses and dresses and pink at the school, and they're all being bullied. And they were really nice, but they presented almost entirely about pronouns and gender identity, which again is important. But they had one slide with this picture, famous picture of Franklin Roosevelt in a white dress with, long hair, and in which they explained, oh, this boy stuff and girl stuff is made up, and we don't have to follow that. And it's very, very, very important to understand the historical context of childhood and gender, that our idea of normal is just that, an idea. And it's an idea rooted in very dark places. It's rooted in misogyny and homophobia. That's it. That is why we have the pink blue divide. And it's good for selling stuff, right? It's a language we all speak, but there's nothing, it doesn't come from any place good. So it's very important for, I think, preschool teachers to understand a lot of the work that the center does and puts out about gender schema theory and how kids acquire their information about gender so young. That work has to happen in preschool, but in elementary school all the way up to through high school, to also understand that although many people think gender stereotypes is some word that we took care of in the 70s, that norms and stereotypes are alive and well and pressing on young people as much as ever before, despite this kind of, escape hatch we've opened with new terminology. Those gender norms are still really constricting kids.
And I would say too, just because that's what we do at the center, mainstream, if you can get into media and entertainment media and social media and storytelling, you will reach, and if you tell the story in a way that does not feel didactic, that is not a picture of Franklin Roosevelt, who kids are like, who? I don't want to be like that old guy. Like, you got him, like, having been in the film industry, you have to be able to speak a child's language in a way that they can relate to. And so smuggling those messages into the entertainment media, Lisa, maybe we'll have you come do something with us when we do our next sort of talk to studios or live stream around this stuff.
I'd love to. I really want the media, to take this on. And that was one of my op-eds in the Times, was about, let's put some masculine girls back and some feminine boys in these TV shows. We've got non-binary kids, we've got trans kids, and we've got feminine girls, we've got masculine boys.
Yeah.
We have room. We have, 4 million things to watch on TV. We have room for these kids too.
Yeah, I want The Rock. I don't know if he's cool anymore to kids, but I want The Rock wearing a dress and and he actually does with his child sometimes, but.
Oh, that's awesome. I do love him. Yes. Let's have him do that.
Well, I hope he'll listen to this conversation.
Somebody call The Rock.
So this is an interesting story from Molly. She says, I was going through a drive-through to get 2 kid meals, and I was asked if I wanted a girl or a boy toy. I said I would like a bulldozer and a stuffed animal, and again was asked, do I want a boy or a girl toy? And Molly replied, my daughter would like a bulldozer and my son wants the stuff. To which meal you want the boy and girl toy in. Any ideas how to change this? And I think that also goes to advertising, the role, how products are advertised for boys or girls. So could you speak to that?
Yeah, I think you can wage a social media campaign. There are groups working on this. There's a group in the UK called Let Toys Be Toys. In general, the UK is way ahead of us on this. They're working so much harder to undo the stereotypes that are literally woven into clothes and that are literally coloring the toys. So there are a few groups in England doing it. There have been some, in theory, Target doesn't have gendered toy aisles anymore, although I think they are still largely pink and blue. But I think that manufacturers, marketers need to know that this will work for selling stuff, that there won't be a backlash. And of course, we can't promise that, right? Because a lot of people really, when I say put a boy on the jewelry making kit, many people are quite sure that it's biological and that boys shouldn't be doing that, and boys shouldn't wear makeup, and boys shouldn't like pink. And so you are fighting against belief systems. But I think if we have a kind of consumer movement advocating for that, that's part of it. Let them know that this is what we demand and that we don't want our children's worlds to be filtered like that. I don't want to get a tablet and have you leave off all of the apps and TV shows with sports because I selected boy. It's not
Girl.
It's not right because I selected girl. Exactly. Yes, thank you.
It would be good if you selected sports, then we'd be counter stereotype. I mean, obviously it isn't good either way, but counter stereotypes actually work to change unconscious bias. So
they work, right? There are lots of studies that show that simply showing kids pictures of girls playing with Matchbox cars, and then you say, is a Matchbox car a boy toy or a girl toy? And they say, oh, it's a girl toy because
it's amazing how simple it really is. Like really, actually, I can't mean sometimes some of our interventions with media, and it's just showing them one short little clip, and it changes
And
thoughts.
let's get McDonald's to do it. You know, let's just tell McDonald's, you know, do an experiment, you know, work with the Centers for Scholars and Storytellers and do an experiment where you ask people that and then you give them the opposite and record that. And, you know, like, let's do it
You
all.
can come and do it with
everywhere.
us.
I think it would be so interesting to just start doing that with people and seeing, do we make a dent that way?
Very interesting. Can you speak a little bit to I know there's a lot of confusion now with the pronouns, and they change frequently. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that to sort of help us better understand. I think people are in fear of making a mistake now or
Yeah.
offending someone using the wrong pronouns. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
I mean, I think in general, we're in a time of where people are terrified of saying the wrong thing. They're terrified of being shamed and labeled, you know, a bad word that then encourages other people to reject them. And I think it's happening very much on the left, and it's affected me a lot. I think there are lots of things I didn't include in my book because I was afraid. And I think that, you know, for people who believe, for instance, that boy or girl are fully social categories that anyone can opt into, right? That it has nothing to do with your body, which many people believe. And the younger you are, the more likely you are to believe that boy and girl are socially constructed categories, and you can, if you feel you belong to one of them, you can choose that. Thus, pronouns are very important because that's your way of being let into the group. That's your way of, it's important for other people to call you what you want to be called because it signifies that they accept you as a member of that group. And I feel very lucky that so far one of my kids is not it, just any pronoun is fine. There is no way to misgender that kid because she is aware that the pronouns people use for her are about them. They're about what they think a girl is and a boy is, and they're not about her. And some people feel that way too, especially some butch women who maybe went their whole life with people not understanding who they were. And at some point they think, oh, pronouns are about other people's biases and they're not about me. But then there are people for whom it's deeply, deeply important. And I think, you know, they, them, the emergence of they, them is really interesting and has a lot of potential because it is very hard to separate sex and gender. That is, it is very hard for us to say it's a boy or it's a girl without making all kinds of assumptions about who that kid's going to be based on that. And so to move toward a world, which I want to do, where sex and gender are just less emphasized in childhood, you know, I think that's an interesting path toward it. And but I also think that if somebody uses the wrong pronoun, if someone doesn't care about pronouns, if someone doesn't want to put their pronouns in their bio, that should all be fine too. And that if we make mistakes, that shouldn't be seen as some kind of moral failing, but mistakes are how everyone learns. That's how children learn. And guess what? That's how adults learn too. So
And it makes us human, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, we have one question here from a child psychiatrist, Jeff, who was trained at UCLA and is now on faculty at USC, but we won't hold that against him. It says, I've been concerned about the ready acceptance of quick fix biological solutions to complex biopsychosocial problems. The increasingly common designation of young people as trans seems to be part of this trend.
This is a hard question to answer in 3 minutes. I think that there's so much that's interesting about it. I think there are so many contradictory arguments. And I think that there's a long history in this country of medicalizing all kinds of things that don't need to be medicalized. But on the other hand, I think there's a long history of cosmetic surgery bringing enormous psychic relief for all kinds of people. So I think it's incredibly complicated. Again, it's a terrifying subject to weigh into. But the one thing I'll say about it is that I keep reading. There was an article in the New Yorker, which it was sad because it was just so inaccurate. And it keeps portraying any resistance to medicalizing gender nonconformity in very young people. It keeps portraying it as a right-wing kind of resistance. And it's not true. It's very, very many people on the left. It's very many progressive people who care a lot and want to know, why is there a 2,000% increase in girls being referred to gender clinics? And why is there a growing group of detransitioners? How can we make sure that kids who are really going to be helped by that medical protocol have access to it? And how can we also make sure that kids who are going to be really harmed by it don't have to go through that? And if you can't ask questions about it because you're going to be labeled transphobic, then we're stuck. And then have this polarized take that anyone who objects to it is a right-wing, hater kind of person. And so again, my hope is that we can find a way to keep these discussions very complicated, very nuanced, to try to turn the temperature down. Now we have a much more LGBT friendly president, and maybe we'll be able to have conversations again, because these people, their very existence is not being constantly threatened by our policies. So maybe we can ask, how do we make sure people who need medicine get it? And how do we make sure people who don't need it just learn to find room for themselves in this hypergendered world that we've created? And how, if we lessen the intensity of this hypergendering of childhood, which is so recent and so pervasive, then we have more room for all kids to explore, cis kids and trans kids and everybody in between. That's really my goal. And then I think maybe we'll have fewer people who transitioned and realized that it wasn't what they needed.
Yalda, any last comments on that?
Oh, I think I've learned a lot, and I'm, what I'm really grateful for, and what you've shared is you're just really wanting to support young children to, be who they are and not be labeled, and and it doesn't fall along political lines, which these conversations often do, and sometimes what you are saying, might be surprising to some people, and on both sides of the political spectrum. But I really appreciate that, because I think it's very important for young people.
Yeah, I don't want to politicize this talk. I want this to be about creating space for kids, and to not rushing to decide who they are because they behave differently than we thought they would. And to just, the more we can open up both sides of the pink-blue divide to all kids. And just, I described tomboys as living in this protective bubble of ambiguity until puberty. And I'm just saying, let's let all kids have that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the biggest thing for me too, is let's let the boys have it as well. And, you identified so many places where, boys aren't getting what they need. And what's so sad, and I know we have to end, is that, when you're in that man box, as some people have called it, there's more depression, there's more suicide, we're hurting them as teens and adults by forcing people to conform to these roles.
Well, thank you both. Unfortunately, our time is up. I know this conversation could certainly continue, and you've given us so much to think about, and really, really appreciate both of you being here tonight. And we're very, very grateful to you for sharing this knowledge, your expertise. And I think this subject needs to continue in many venues. I want to thank everybody that has tuned in today. I hope that you'll attend more of our Open Mind programs. Our next program will be on February 9th, when we'll be welcoming the author, Beverly Hyman Feed, who wrote the book Aging in High Heels. And she will be joined by Dr. Karen Miller from the UCLA Longevity Center. So I hope everybody will tune in. All our calendar is on our website, again, friendsofsemel.org. You can find all our Open Mind programs and past videos there. So thank you for sharing your time with us, and we're very grateful and educating us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
That was great.
Really appreciate it.
Have a good night.